This presentation is about General George Henry Thomas, who was born in Virginia, remained loyal to the Union, was a career Army officer in the U.S. Army, and fought for the Union in the Civil War with great accomplishment. General Thomas ended up being one of the three great generals of the Civil War. General Thomas was acclaimed by at least 10 generals who associated with him during the war as being the greatest general during the war. At least 2 of the group acclaimed him as being the best general in the U.S. Army during the entire 19th century, and at least 2 of them, including James Garfield, future 20th President of the United States, acclaimed Thomas to be the very best general in the U.S. Army since the time of George Washington. Thomas also received high acclaim and praise from Bruce Catton, who was considered probably the most eminent Civil War historian during the 20th century, who said rather late in life, "If I had known as much about George Thomas then, when I was writing my 7 books on the Civil War, as I know now, I'd have to rewrite all my books to include Thomas's exploits in the war." And General William Tecumseh Sherman exclaimed that Thomas was the very best defensive general of the Civil War and was in the pantheon of great generals in offensive combat during the war. Thomas won and ended the Civil War in 5 states, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, by December of 1864. Thomas is not well known today, but he was extremely well known in the 19th century. And that has to be because of the fact that Thomas was a very quiet, retiring, shy man who refused to boast about any of his exploits during the war, refused to write his memoirs, and left it to history, as he said, for others to decide what his true value and worth was during the war. As a result, Thomas is not well known these days. Thomas is known, at least among historians and military analysts, as the man who never lost a battle during the Civil War, or his portion of a battle during the Civil War. Thomas is known by these same group of people as the man who defeated General John Bell Hood at the Battle of Nashville and utterly destroyed Hood's army, reducing it from 57,000 men to 3,000 men. Thomas is the only general that I have ever heard of who chased the enemy 250 miles in order to run them into the ground. We should also consider what Thomas did by way of saving the army. At Stones River, when the entire right flank collapsed after a tremendous onslaught by the Confederate forces, Thomas was in the center, and he swung half of his front line to his right and into an inverted V with a fishhook on the end of it, and stopped the Confederate attack and stalled it. And then the next day used the force of cannon fire to drive the Confederates off the field. At Chickamauga, he did basically the same thing. When the Union right flank collapsed, Thomas was in the center. He created the inverted V and then U-shaped and moved his troops back from the original line up Snodgrass Hill to occupy that, and held off the Confederate forces for a period of 11 hours until he was ordered to leave the battlefield. The other point that should be raised is Thomas twice destroyed Confederate armies. Not only did he destroy Hood's army that he attacked at Nashville, but he also destroyed Nathan Bedford Forrest's 6,000-man army that had accompanied Hood to Nashville. After the war, with their memoirs, Grant and Sherman both claimed that Thomas was the best general on defense, but he was awfully slow and deliberate in his movements when it came to offense, which was a damn right lie. Thomas at Nashville attacked within 12 hours after the ice storm had stopped the night before and the ice was starting to melt. This was after a week of ice. Thomas was probably the best of the group of Grant, Sherman, Lee, Longstreet, and Stonewall Jackson. By way of contrast, Thomas never lost a battle. Each one of these guys did lose battles. In particular, with Lee, he lost at Gettysburg in a big way at the Battle of Shiloh Church. For 3 days, the sentries kept reporting that there was increased Confederate activity in front of them. Sherman and Grant simply told the sentries to go back to their posts, that the Confederate Army was nowhere in the neighborhood. Grant and Sherman were not sending out cavalry, not sending out patrols, not sending out scouts, not sending out spies. They had no idea where the Confederate Army was. What happened was the morning of the 4th day, at about 5 o'clock in the morning, virtually everybody was asleep in their sleeping bags when all of a sudden the Confederates came over the wall and invaded and caught all of the Union soldiers by surprise. Halleck, the department commander of the Department of the Mississippi, was irate with Grant. As far as Halleck was concerned, Grant was done. Longstreet lost to Thomas at the Battle of Chickamauga. He couldn't defeat Thomas. It was a standstill despite the fact that Thomas had 40,000 troops and the Confederates had 100,000 troops. And he still held them off for 11 hours. Stonewall Jackson was defeated by Thomas at the Battle of Falling Waters. Thomas has to be considered the very best of all of the generals of the Civil War because he never was defeated. He never had a bad result. Whereas the others, like Grant, Sherman, Lee, Longstreet, Jackson, did have bad results. In my estimation, they're a step slightly lower than Thomas.